Thanks everyone for coming. This is our webinar on immutable backups and disaster recovery from our Are You Cybersecurity Ready webinar series. Let's go on to the next slide here. All right, I'm going to introduce myself. Many of you have already met me, but I'm Art O'Kane, the field CISO and CIO from Airiam. And this is Tim. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Tim Hetzel. I'm based out of our Midwest region. I'm a solutions architect, so I'm working heavily with our infrastructure side of things with our data center and our backup solutions.
I'm really happy to have Tim on this webinar with me so that I have another geek to bounce ideas off of here. It's not just me talking about technology.
Hopefully we don't geek out too much.
Exactly. That happened to be in the last webinar. I had to reel myself back. I was like, okay, I'm going down the geek hole. Not everyone on the webinar is a geek, so let me pull back. Yep. So let me tell you a little bit about Airiam. Those of you who are in that are new and haven't attended one of our webinars or are not familiar with who we are an MSP, a managed service provider that handles IT managed services, as well as an MSSP who handles cybersecurity and managed security services. We really are focused on three things together: IT management, best-in-class security, and creating value through resilience. And resilience has really been our focus lately. You know, there are a lot of IT vendors and there's a lot of cybersecurity vendors, but there's not many that do both well. So focusing on both of them really lends us to being able to not only secure you, but help you recover and bounce back from an incident. We've been, on a lot of press, and we've dealt with a lot of major incidents and a lot of major situations. So there's been a lot of articles about us out there. And who Airiam is we're really a combination of 5 different companies that got put together through mergers and acquisition. But like Tim mentioned, he's out of the Midwest region. I'm out of the Pennsylvania office. So we have offices all over. Next slide, please. We have now these numbers are a little dated. It's closer to 75,000 hours of experience responding to ransomware. Right now, we get calls from partners that are bringing us cyber incidents. And so these aren't managed clients that we're normally managing IT for, but people that have suffered a ransomware incident. And we're helping to rebuild after their incident and helping them, close up their gaps. We usually handle more than 100 ransomware incidents per year. And those range from, the biggest enterprises, brand names that everybody's heard of, down to small SMBs. So it's been a real range of business sizes and verticals. So it's not really focused at any vertical. Most companies were really recovering almost the same way, whether you're an enterprise or a 5-person company. And we've recovered over 25,000 servers, workstations, and networks. All right, next slide.
It's all about really bouncing back from a disaster, right? And getting the business up and running and then preventing it from happening again.
Absolutely. Yeah. After an incident, you're in shock, you're in a crisis state, everything's going wrong. You're looking at, lost contracts, lost business, lost reputation, in addition to data breach and all the things that are surrounding that. And then you're looking at, having to recover all of your technology at the same time. So we help you kind of deal with that situation as a whole, as well as, getting back on top of things and getting back in business. So we've dealt with a lot of clients, and this is just a small sampling. Next slide, please. And like I said, we've come from several different companies combined. Most of us are in the Midwest or East Coast this time, but we're still expanding.
Yeah, and even though Airiam's a relatively young company, we bring decades of experience from the separate companies that came together and from the individuals that work for Airiam.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Airiam itself is a brand that's only a few years old, but the combination of the companies that have been put together to create Airiam, each of us are 20-year plus companies. So there is a lot of experience and industry knowledge that comes along with Airiam. So let me run through the agenda really quick. What are immutable backups? We'll discuss that. We'll discuss really how that plays into disaster recovery and what you need to think about as far as disaster recovery. And then we'll go into my favorite part, which is the tabletop exercises and how to practice for a disaster recovery or an incident response situation. And how do you restore a backup in an emergency? And that's going to vary based on technology, but there's some general steps that we follow regardless of the technology. All right. Now, what are immutable backups? In short, immutable backups are backups that can't be changed or deleted. So given that information, do you or your IT leader have immutable backups set up? And we're going to do a little poll here. So remember, immutable backups are backups that can't be changed or deleted. So while you're taking the poll, there are a lot of different kinds of backup solutions out there. I prefer some solutions like Veeam to some other solutions that I've dealt with. But Veeam itself allows for a very fast recovery, it's really a business continuity solution. So I'm able to recover an entire environment in seconds with Veeam if you have the right storage and the right infrastructure. That being said, Veeam in and of itself is not an immutable backup solution. So we usually layer it in with other backups. All right. Or pretty spread out answers. It looks like it's about even between yes, no, and I don't know. All right, next slide, please. So like I mentioned, immutable backups are backups that can't be deleted, can't be changed. So why are immutable backups important? It's really there to stop an attacker from encrypting or deleting your backups so that you can recover after a cyber attack. That's the main reason to have immutable backups. Also, immutable backups are important for some compliances because we need to be able to say that, okay, these can't be changed. Where some backups, if we can delete them or change them, then there's no assurance of that information over time. So why should you have immutable backups? Threat actors delete and encrypt your on-site backups. So if you think about ransomware, which is increasingly more common right now than ever, when the threat actor deploys ransomware in your network, they're encrypting all of your data on all of your servers, on all of your workstations. Every machine in your network gets encrypted. That's just their MO for the attack. If you have on-site backups, they attack those. They look for those backups. Usually they're making it easy on themselves and they're just encrypting your backups. So when you go to recover from your backups, they're encrypted also. I've seen them delete backups, delete snapshots on storage area networks, et cetera, as well, so that you have no recovery point on your network. So when you're depending on that on-prem solution, a lot of times it's not available. Now, there are some immutable on-prem solutions. I tend to not trust an on-prem solution with ransomware because a hacker can try to hack the box. If the attacker is motivated enough, they're going to spend the time and energy to try to delete your backups. So a real immutable backup solution can't be changed, can't be deleted. Once you've written that backup to that storage, it's there forever. That means that the storage continues to grow. We have archives and retention set so that, we have that archival storage, but it can't be attacked by the attacker. The hacker can't delete your data. So the ideal is an air-gapped immutable backup. This is why I prefer to get it out of your network and not have it sitting in your network, to have it so that the attacker can't attack your backups. Although there are immutable backup solutions that are not air-gapped, that actually sit on your backup, on your network, so that they just use a file system that's immutable, so that once it's written, think of a tape. Once you write to a tape, it's more difficult to write over it. That's really what we're seeing with those on-prem appliances. They're using technology that will protect you from being overwritten. Next slide, please.
Call me paranoid, but I get nervous about anything that's on-prem with the source system. If that's your only copy,
Absolutely.
or only air-gapped immutable copy, it's not necessarily bad to have that in addition to something that's offsite, but it's, there's sometimes these advanced persistent threats, persistent being that they're in the network for a long period of time and you don't know about it either, so that's a lot of time for them to gain knowledge and access to things
and poison your backups.
Right. Exactly.
They can change your backup schedules, and we've seen that before. They've changed technology so that you think you're having successful backups and you're not. So monitoring will show that, hey, my backups are successful, and meanwhile you're backing up one file and you actually are not backing up a system. So there's a lot of things that threat actors can do with an on-prem solution once they have access to your network. Usually once they have access to the network, they're able to get around and get access to everything they need to. So obscurity is not really a valid thing. People think that, oh, well, we have the backup over in Jane's closet, the threat actor is never going to know. On the network, they'll just see it. It'll just be a device that they see, and in their surveillance of the network, when they gain access to the network, one of the things they're doing is looking for targets, looking for data they can exfiltrate and steal, and then looking for your backups, because if they're able to delete your backups, then they can make sure they get paid. So here are some statistics. 93% of businesses without a disaster recovery plan are out of business within a year. However, those people that do have a good backup solution, 96% of them are able to survive a ransomware attack. Also, 50% of businesses experience a downtime event in the past 5 years that was longer than a full workday. So that's including cyber attacks, but it's also other kind of hardware failure, system failure, things like that. But they're downtimes that would take you down and out of production for longer than a workday. Usually in a cyber attack where you get ransomware, it's much longer than a workday. Most companies that we're having to deal with, that we get calls about, we're getting a call from them after they've been down a week, and we're trying to recover them. And on only the best incidents are they up in a couple days. Usually they're down for a couple weeks to a month. And 75% of
revenue and
absolutely,
and reputation harm as well.
Imagine telling your customers
see that.
Yep. Imagine telling your customers you can't do business for them for a month. That's ridiculous. But 75% of small businesses don't have a recovery plan in place. So they just haven't invested in that, or they have a backup but haven't really thought about how to recover from that. And the recovery is something that is crucial. I've worked with so many small businesses that when I ask them what their backup is, and they just say, oh, it's my thumb drive. I just back up QuickBooks to my thumb drive. I'm good to go. I'm like, is QuickBooks your only business? What about production? What about the materials you make? What about all your marketing and sales stuff? What about all the products you make and designs? Like, it's great that you're taking a copy of your QuickBooks file, but there's usually a lot more to it. And when you get ransomware, it affects every system. So it's, you have no laptop, you have no computer, you have no server. We're having to rebuild everything from scratch. So it's that is unfortunate that a lot of people aren't really considering their entire system. We usually consider your servers, all servers, as critical. Workstations, yeah, we can reinstall those. But the assumption is that all of your critical stuff is on the server. All right, next slide. All right, assume breach. And this is where I get a little tinfoil hat and put it on. And I know this is a little bit paranoid for everybody, but I like to take this tactic of assuming breach. Ransomware will target everybody. You usually see in the news that it's targeting the big companies. It's targeting the Fortune 500 companies because those are the ones that make the news. And the municipalities like Dallas and stuff right now is in the news. That's the stuff that is newsworthy. Meanwhile, there are thousands of small businesses that are getting hit constantly, and they're not making the news. And so it's important to realize that right now, small businesses are more of a target than enterprise. And so right now, everyone is on a playing field where you're easily attacked. Small businesses, the reason they're getting hit so hard right now is because most of them are easier to attack. An enterprise has invested millions of dollars in security. A small business just has no ability to. So we do really the best we can with small businesses. And some of you are in a much better place than others. Some of you have EDR on all your endpoints. You have MFA, you have a next-gen firewall. You're worried about encrypting your data, and you're worried about data loss and things like that. But some people just aren't there, and it seems to be the majority of businesses aren't there. So let's take the assumption of breach. Let's assume, since 62% of companies in 2021 in America experienced some data breach. 62%, that's the majority of companies in the US in 2021 experienced a data breach. Let's assume that you've been breached and you don't know what they're stealing right now from your network. Somebody's in your network right now. They have a back door. You don't know where it is. Hasn't been detected yet. They haven't done anything destructive or nefarious yet. So, there's nothing really to set off the alarms, but they're there and they're waiting. They might be stealing your data, and they're probably looking around to see what's next to attack. They've identified where your backups are. They've identified, what your ERP system is or what your finance system is and where your file servers are. And they're just making sure that they have all their targets in place, and they're figuring out what your insurance plan looks like right now so that they can identify what ransom amount they should ask for. Any second, they could drop ransomware, and your day could just go to a really bad day. If you assume that kind of scenario, what is your level of confidence that you're able to bounce back? And what would your time of downtime be? Is it, a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it something where you're gonna have to pay the ransom and, be down for a couple days? Or is it rebuilding all your servers and be down for a month? That kind of exercise is really important when you're trying to figure out your actual risk as a business in this environment. Look at that 62% number have experienced a data breach in 2021. That's a lot. And I can tell you right now in 2023, we're experiencing higher volume of calls than we did in 2021. So it's worse right now. And a lot of companies are just still not prepared. So this mental exercise of assuming breach serves a purpose. It makes you think about what your recovery plan is, what your risk is, what reality is. All right, next slide. How immutable backups work. An immutable backup is a copy of your data. It's a copy of your systems. We like to do your entire system, but it can't be modified, deleted, or overwritten. Once you write it, it's there. Immutable backups are really the recovery answer to ransomware attacks. That because the attacker that tries to attack that data can't alter your data. And there's always a clean copy for recovery. So that's the tricky part when we're dealing with an on-prem backup. An on-prem solution is a lot of times we don't know whether the attacker has poisoned your data, whether they've played with your backup system, whether the backups that it looks like have been successful are actually recoverable. Next slide.
Yeah, someone
All
else.
right, Tim.
Talk about a kind of an example of a recent attack that we were dealing with. It was a large manufacturing client of ours, and we weren't providing any like cybersecurity or managed services to them, but they were an air gap backup client. So they had these immutable backups in the cloud of all of their critical systems, their physical servers and VMware environment. And a threat actor got into their environment and encrypted everything. So their entire VM environment was down. They actually encrypted the data stores within VMware itself. So none of the guest VMs were accessible or bootable. You couldn't get any of the data off of them. The physical servers weren't bootable, or you couldn't access any of the data because it was all encrypted. And they, we were able to successfully recover their environment using a combination of SAN snapshots and the air gap backup. And some of the SAN snapshots were deleted, but we were able to recover the vCenter environment from air gap. And the threat actor was actually trying to send commands from the device in the environment to delete the cloud backups, and they were unsuccessful at that because there's no way from the customer environment, from the endpoint, to modify those to access the backup console or anything like that. But they were able to change the backup schedules and the protected data from the endpoint using some kind of remote admin commands. And I think, this shows us a couple things, is that the threat actors are sometimes as sophisticated, or they understand the platform as well as the admins do in a lot of cases. But they were unsuccessful at, modifying or deleting any of that data, and the ironic part about this is that we, if we were coming in for an incident response on this and trying to recover them, we would have already disabled the backup jobs on this stuff as well. So they didn't cause any harm doing that, but it prevented, they were thinking like, all right, if we disable the jobs, then maybe the backup sets will expire out, but we don't, the old backups never expire out. They're there basically forever, as long as, and then we've got archives as well on top of the regular scheduled backups. So they were up and running pretty fast because we were able to recover that back. And, pulling down from the cloud to recover some of those critical systems like the physical servers, the vCenter, and then also being able to mount up some of the SAN snapshots as well, and be able to, if we needed to mount an older snapshot, we could then pull down the difference of the data from the cloud backup as well on that one. And customers very happy with that one, and now they're looking at a lot more security protections as well.
Right. I think that the real interesting part about this is the hackers know their stuff. They're seasoned sysadmins, and they have access to Google too. So when they see some technology that we're using for backup, they're trying to attack it. Regardless of what technology that is, they're trying to attack it. And in this case, they tried to attack our air gap backups and were not able to. But wow, like the fact,
a great example of the platform working the way it was supposed to.
Exactly.
These guys, they understand VMware, they understand backups, they understand SAN technology, storage, cloud. They can look up the vendor documentation. Like, the main difference is, we're trying to protect the environment, and they're operating in an unethical and illegal sort of way, but the level of expertise there is pretty high.
Yes.
And so it's,
Absolutely.
a lot of times it's, I say it's a belt and suspenders approach to things. It's like, don't rely just on SAN snapshots, because I've seen people, the threat actors, delete those. Don't rely on just a backup, have more than one in place, and we'll touch on that in a bit too, about having more than one backup copy of different types. You can go to the next slide.
All right. And like Tim mentioned, this is kind of his specialty, discussing really how to set up your backup situation. And there are some words that we're going to toss out, like RTO and RPO. Feel free to ask questions in the chat about this, and any questions you have along the way, or in the question and answer field there, because we'll get to all those questions. But any acronyms that we're tossing out, anything that you have a question about the technology or anything, feel free to ask. Anyway, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so some best practice to follow here is, one of them is, we recommend increasing the backup frequency. A lot of historically, people would only do maybe one backup a day, or even one backup a week, and really we need to be looking at more often is kind of the best practice today. You want to align your backup strategy to the service level as far as what the business dictates. These are often not IT decisions anymore. It's business decisions that are kind of dictating how often you back up and what data is protected. We'll get into the 3-2-1-1 backup strategy and what that means. Often, I think the old way of looking at it was 3-2-1. Now it's kind of taken it a step farther beyond that, of kind of the extra protection there. And using cloud backup with intelligence, it's can you automate things, stuff that you don't want to have to do manually, verify it's working ahead of time. Is the integrity of your backup actually good? And then having alerts and reports and things like that to tell you, and even automatic self-healing and repair on some of that if there are issues. See that you have a good backup copy, or that you're alerted to the issue if you need to respond to it and intervene at that point. But it's kind of taking as much of that out of your hands and putting it in the system to kind of manage it for you. And then backups aren't really data retention. I think a lot of times people confuse these two. Backups are meant more for recovering from a disaster, recovering from security incident or data loss. If you're looking for data retention, you should be doing something in addition to backup, not necessarily in place of it, and not using backup in place of retention policies. There's vendors like Microsoft and many others that offer retention policies for compliance reasons and other things like that. And then, kind of along the lines of that is not overlooking your SaaS applications. There's things like in Microsoft Azure and Office 365 that Microsoft and other SaaS providers might not include a backup of that data out of the box. It's just not part of the service offering. You can add on third party, or you do your own on top of that. But it's don't assume that your data is being protected just because you're using a cloud platform somewhere else. You got to make sure that's included with it, or it needs to be part of your strategy. And then,
Absolutely,
kind of the last part of that would be the endpoints. Oftentimes those get overlooked. You might have a policy telling people that you got to keep your data in the cloud, or in an application like OneDrive, or you got to keep it on the server file shares. But a lot of times, people aren't following the policy even though they're supposed to be, or there's stuff that gets overlooked where say you're running accounting like QuickBooks off of a laptop, or a desktop, and maybe that database with all the accounting data is actually sitting on that endpoint instead of on the server. And we kind of see those things overlooked because sometimes it's not IT implementing that. It might actually be a business user in a different department, and making sure that we're protecting that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the SaaS. on the SaaS application piece, one of the things that I discuss with people is that, although I am the first to encourage everyone to go to the cloud, I think there's no point in having a server for something where there's a perfectly good SaaS application for, because SaaS applications are always going to do it better, or generally do it better. But how's that getting backed up? We're putting a lot of responsibility on the SaaS companies for backing up data, and a lot of them are putting the responsibility back on us. So with Office 365, with SharePoint Online, things like that, they are not backing it up. They have a short retention of their deleted items and everything, but they're encouraging you to use a backup solution for it. Other solutions, Salesforce, etc., that are cloud solutions, make sure that you have a backup of that. Whether it's a third-party application, whether it's contractual with the company, where they are providing some kind of backup solution in that. The worst thing to happen is for one of those SaaS vendors to get breached and to get ransomware, and then them say that they have no backup of your data. And, all of your business is riding on that data. So think about that as far as your SaaS strategy and how you're going to be backing up that data in case of, the worst kind of event happens to your vendor. That's third-party risk management.
Right in those agreements, they'll say, they're not responsible for it. So, and I think that's a big part of it, is they don't want to be responsible for it, so they kind of put it back on you. Or, maybe you can do backup through Microsoft Azure, but it's not included with it. And a lot of times I would recommend, well, do you really want the main data and the backup copy handled by the same vendor, or do you want to be looking at a different provider for those as well, so that they're not within the same cloud? Sometimes there's outages and there's other issues there, and sometimes diversifying that part of it is a good idea too.
Yep.
Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so one of the things, I'll try not to geek out too much on this one, is increasing the backup frequency. Like traditionally, it was a lot of companies would do just once a day, or they would say, well, not a lot of data changes, I'll do it like once every 2 days or once a week. A lot of times I encourage, if I'm talking to an IT person, or even a non-technical executive, these are business decisions where you're, two of the acronyms we'll kind of throw out is like RPO and RTO. So RPO is a recovery point objective. It's like, how much data can you afford to lose? Like, how long can you go between backups? And what is an acceptable risk there for you for data loss? If you're doing it once a day, you might lose 24 hours worth of productivity and business data. Does that mean lost orders or disruption to customers? So there's a lot of considerations there, and I would encourage the discussion to be from the business standpoint of saying, here is what we're agreeing to as far as acceptable loss time that we want to be able to recover it, and then IT can implement it based off of those policies. And so that's why a lot of times we see, and what we recommend is going down even to like backing up hourly. And the more often you back up, there's the less changed data there. So it goes a lot quicker when you are doing it. And for some application systems, like email or databases, you often need to be managing the application level of that backup as well, so that it's making sure that, the log files on a SQL Server will continue to grow if you aren't doing backups on it, and if you're not doing the right type of backup. And so doing that more often actually gives you oftentimes granularity to go down to individual minute to say, I need to recover something at 9:37 p.m. As opposed to, well, I did a backup once a day and I've got midnight, that's it, So I think it's a discussion to have, and there's no one size fits all, but the other part of that is recovery time. And it's like, how long is it going to take you to restore that backup if you have it? Generally, the more often you run that, the recovery is going to be a lot faster too, because you might have to only restore the last 2 hours worth of data versus I got to pull down a week's worth of backup data. and it takes the, there's more bandwidth involved, or if it's a local restore, more network traffic, a lot more data involved in that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that an architect like Tim can help you guys figure out if you need help figuring out how often backups should happen. If you have data that's never changing, if you have a server that's like running some old system that maybe does occasional calculations but doesn't store any data or it doesn't change, that may only need to be backed up every week. But most people's file servers or their database servers need to be backed up more frequently because that data is changing so often. And so that RPO, that recovery point objective, is really can be altered per system based on what you need as a business. But as far as the recovery time objective, that's how long it takes us to recover you, or it takes your IT team to recover you. That is something that is a business decision also, because that usually determines how much investment you're going to have in backup technology and storage technology. If you need to be up and running within 15 minutes after an outage, that's a lot more spend in hardware and environment and a DR site than if you can be down for a day, that kind of thing. So working out those kind of solutions with an expert like Tim is really where that's where he comes in. So if you want to discuss RPO and RTO at any time, feel free to reach out.
Yep. I had a thought about that and I lost it, but that's okay. You covered it really well. The other thing we were going to talk about here is this 3-2-1-1 backup strategy. The old kind of methodology around that was 3-2-1, which is, the first part of this is the same, where it's you got 3 copies of your data. You want, ideally a local backup, possibly a cloud backup, and then maybe even another copy in a different location that you control, or it's a cloud provider or a partner data center. You could be replicating between different sites here as the backup copies. There's a lot of different ways to do it. It's, I'd say it's based off of business needs, or it could be with a cloud provider as well, right? And then 2 is for the different types of media. You don't want all of your backups on just disk. You can use tape backups for that. There's a lot of different technologies there, even though it's older. We were talking about it before. Tape is still a valid option as well, and there's even if you're not using a physical tape drive, there's virtual tape libraries you can use as well for that VTL. So that can actually use different storage, or it can use a cloud container. You can put it up in like an S3 bucket Amazon or an Azure blob storage. So there's a lot of different options there. I think sometimes people get hung up on like, well, I can't put any kind of backup copy on disk. Well, if you have it on 2 different types of disk, maybe it's a different stand storage you have, maybe you have it on external drives, different vendors. The thing you don't want to deal with is having all of it on the same backup, and then there's a hardware failure that you use, on the same media, and you have a hardware failure where you use that. And then you want to have 1 copy that is offsite. That can be, as I said before, like in a different data center. It can be in a partner data center. It can be in a cloud provider. What the old way we used to do is we'd put it on tape and we'd ship it to another location. So it takes longer to recover when you have that kind of stuff, as we were talking about kind of in that last slide of the recovery time. It goes up a lot more if you have to physically ship a tape back, or a hard drive if you're sending a hard drive offsite. But it is still a viable option as well, and it's often you don't go to the offsite copy as your first one if you have a local copy, because it's faster. Our air gap platform has an option to do a local speed vault. So you can actually have a copy in your local business office running off a separate physical piece of hardware, and it's a lot quicker to recover there, but you don't want to use that in place of the copy that you have offsite. That's, critical that you have kind of more than one physical location for cyber and for disasters, whatever comes your way. And then, the second one there is the air gapped, or the immutable copy, is making sure, it can be offline, whether that's disconnected from the network, or if you have it immutable where it can't be modified. We were talking earlier about immutable copies in the local data center, or it could be immutable in the cloud somewhere else. So it's critical that we have a copy that cannot be modified. So you can go to the next slide.
All right, quick poll for everybody. How often do you test your recovery processes? Every 6 months, every year, every 2 years, not often, unsure. A lot of you who have MSPs like us are probably wondering, do they ever test it?
That's a great question to bring to them too.
Absolutely. Feel free to
Somebody
ask.
needs to be responsible.
Exactly. All right. So it's pretty spread out. We have every 6 months, every year, every 2 years, not often. Great. And it's one of those things that you can always ask for a restore test, whether a file or a server or anything. Just say, hey, restore this file for me. Restore this server for me. That's a good test for your MSP.
Mm-hmm.
All right, tabletop exercises. My favorite part. I know the time is running out here, so I'll try to breeze through here. But it's recommended to test your recovery runbooks at least annually. The reason annually is logistically it's a little bit hard to get everybody, all the stakeholders that you need to involved. But yeah, runbooks, you can have your IT team kind of test the infrastructure recovery. But in a disaster, there's usually a lot more involved than just your IT team. There's usually, in a cyber incident, there's your incident response team, legal, corporate, public relations, communications, third-party insurance, IT teams, and even law enforcement. It really help, getting everybody together to practice it helps minimize downtime and really builds that muscle memory so that you can recover. When people haven't experienced an incident, I see it all the time where people have anxiety attacks, panic attacks. They will go to the hospital and be out of it for a couple of days in the middle of the worst time for their company because they haven't dealt with it before. So this practice, these drills help with that and help you cope with that. Tim, did you have something to add there?
I was just going to say the law enforcement piece too. I've been involved in the past where we actually had to involve the FBI.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, the FBI is actually much more engaged now with cyber incidents, and they're able to in a lot of ways, assist because they've seen this a lot of times. So assist in how you're going to handle the threat actor. We've seen even some where they've, like in Colonial Pipeline, where they helped claw back the ransom because they were involved at the beginning. So it's definitely
to reach out and communicate with them.
Yes, it's definitely worth pulling them in. So what's a tabletop exercise? It's a practice thing. And we use really almost a Dungeons and Dragons campaign kind of concept to it. You want to get all your stakeholders in a room. You can do it virtually, but then you can't share pizza and Coke. So it's best to get everybody in a room, and that's where it can be a logistical problem, is coordinating that with everybody. When I say all the stakeholders, legal, and a lot of you don't have inside legal. So it may be, your corporate lawyer that you're having to pay to show up for this, your executive team, your IT teams. And if you have an MSP or an MSSP, they should be there too. And if people are remote and can't be because they're states away, that it's okay for them to join via Zoom, but it's best to kind of get this all together. Marketing and PR, these a lot of people exclude that, or sales and customer service, out of a tabletop, when they're the ones who are going to be putting the messaging together for your customers, for the world to see about your incident. And they're the ones who are also dealing with all the customer calls and the sales team and customer service team when there is an incident that happens, whether it's a physical disaster and you had a fire and burn down your building, or you have ransomware. So stakeholders from all of these teams should be involved. So I put together some differences between D&D and tabletop, but it's very similar. You have a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons, and you have a facilitator in a tabletop. Both of them, it's a scenario, and you're running through this. You're bringing all the stakeholders. Dungeons and Dragons, everybody brings a snack, and with a tabletop, it's best if you provide snacks and lunch for everybody. But where a campaign with Dungeons and Dragons can take years, you can do it in a tabletop in a couple hours or a day. Most larger companies, it's a day-long exercise, but you want to make it as real as possible. You want to have the person, the facilitator who's leading it, lead the scenario with an actual incident, something that's possible, that your business is facing actual risk for, whether it's a physical disaster, whether it's ransomware or some other cyber incident, and then run through it with your stakeholders and say, okay, executive team, you hear word of this incident. How are you responding to this? Okay, we're going to call, our MSSP. Okay, what's next? What are you doing while the MSSP is responding? Are you calling legal? Are you calling insurance? Are you bringing in the FBI? And then what does legal want to do? What does insurance want to do at this point? And insurance, if you bring them to the table on that tabletop, and if you have an insurance broker that's local, they will come to this, cyber insurance companies love to be involved in this. And cyber legal firms love to be involved in this. And the FBI actually loves to be involved in your tabletops. They love to see and practice with you. So this is definitely something worth doing, because you'll find that legal wants to proceed one way. Insurance will want to proceed one way. Your IT team is going gung-ho and trying to do something else. And your executive team's worried about getting up and running. So you have to build that plan out together and figure out how you're going to handle this together. And that's where this exercise comes in handy. All right. How do you restore? Now, we follow this regardless of the the kind of incident or emergency, but it's several steps. But really, we want to assess the emergency, assess the environment, and really what our restore plan needs to be. Does it need to be from cloud? Can we use the on-prem backup? That kind of thing. We need to verify that the backup is actually recoverable. In a lot of cases, it's not. So we need to test those backups and check whether those backups are going to be viable for us. We need to choose the right method. Sometimes it's recovering you to the cloud. Sometimes it's recovering you to a DR site, another data center. Sometimes it's just formatting and recovering on site. It really depends on the nature of your incident or disaster and seeing what we need to do. And then we start restoring, and we get really involved with the restoration process. We're babying that. We're watching that, because it can be hours to restore a server. And if there's a problem, it's start all over again on that restoration. So we're watching that and making sure it goes really well. Testing it, we want to test and make sure that not only the system boots, but it has all the data, everything that you need. And if there's anything missing, we may have to go to a different date to restore from that date in your backups. So there's a little bit of back and forth as we're validating the data with you. And so we need stakeholders from the business to tell us, yeah, this database has everything. The finance system is up and running, it works, because we don't know how to use all of your line of business applications. We're focused on getting the server and your data up and running. We need you to actually get in and tell us if it's working right. And then monitoring it. So one of the problems with a cyber attack, especially with an advanced persistent threat, is they may have been in your network for a while. So we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We need to make sure that when we restored, it wasn't an infected system or a system that the threat actor already has access to. And if so, we need to clean it up. And then we'll update and patch those systems if that was a vulnerability that was used in the exploit. And then lessons learned, your post-incident review. What do we need to do better? Did recovery take a long time because you had slow drives in your storage? Did recovery take a long time because you had a slow network? Did recovery take a long time because you had bad internet? These all can play into it. And so we need to put together really an after action plan and improve your environment based off of what we learned during that recovery. Next slide. All right, what's next? So we have a product called Airgapped, which is an immutable cloud backup solution. I would encourage you, if you're not using Airgapped right now, to take a look at it. There are a few companies out there that do immutable cloud backup. So evaluating some solution at this point is what I'd recommend for everybody. Making sure that you have a cloud immutable, so you're taking off out of your data center offsite backup and immutable with this solution. All right, so we've done several webinars here. And these are all accessible online. We have the Understand and Secure Your Environment, where we talked about devices and credentials, and we talked about identifying risks and managing vulnerabilities and patching and 0 days. And we talked about the disaster plan today, and our next one is talking about how to actively monitor threats and determining whether somebody is successfully breaching it. How do you know? Are you able to monitor that effectively? And how can you improve your monitoring so that you have better awareness? All right. Like I said, please enter any questions in the chat. In the QA box. Feel free to send something our way here. Anyone? Bueller.
Anything at all. Give us something easy, something hard.
Yep. And looking at the participants, the attendees, I know several of you, so I'm already anticipating the emails coming with the questions that you're trying to ask in chat here. So feel free to ask in chat or in the Q&A box here.
Looks like we got.
All right.
You see that, Art?
Yeah. How do you set up a tabletop session? So there are a few kind of templates out there. CISA does them, CISA, as well as SANS online. So if you look for example scenarios online for a tabletop session, they'll give you sample scenarios. If you want to try to solo through it, they actually kind of have almost like a plan, a template to run through one. If you want someone to lead it for you, either us, your cyber insurance company, if you have cyber legal, all of us have resources to be able to lead you through one. And really, then it's just a matter of scheduling and getting it on everyone's calendar. ordering pizza or Chinese and carving out some time in the calendar to run through it. Like I said, making sure that your stakeholders are involved is actually important. I find that a lot of executives tend to be kind of divorced from the idea. They're like, oh, IT's got it, but then when it actually happens and the board of directors is breathing at them and they're trying to figure out how to make their customers happy, it's really the executives who are the ones that are leading the charge, and so they really need to be involved here. Yeah, there are templates online. I like the ones with CISA. They give a lot of great resources for running your own tabletop. But it's something that I really enjoy doing. I love throwing out some scenarios and then stepping you through it and say, okay, well, I'm going to recover from this backup. And I say, well, you go to recover from this backup and you find that backup hasn't worked in the last 4 months. So your soonest data that you have to recover from is 4 months old. Is that a recovery path, or is that valid, or are we going to choose to negotiate with the ransomware threat actors and pay the ransom? Is the ransom amount less than 4 months worth of productivity? That kind of thing. So working with each stakeholder in that scenario is actually really important.
I got another question here that I think is a good one. How do you ensure scalability and performance in immutable backup solutions, especially with large volumes of data? So I can speak about our air gap product. I'm sure some of this applies to other ones, but a lot of it is going to depend on the customer's environment. There's with really large data sets, there's the option to actually create a seed drive, because it's I don't know if I said this before, but like our air gap product's a cloud first solution. And so the initial and the primary copy of the data is that immutable one that's in the cloud. So for that initial backup on large systems, it can take a while if you don't have really great bandwidth. So some of our more rural customers, or where their bandwidth limited, will actually do a seed drive, and the data will be backed up locally onto like an external hard drive shipped, and then we can load that up, and they're actually have a full copy of that for the initial baseline within a relatively short period of time, because you can do overnight delivery or whatever. And then every backup that happens after that is only looking at the changed data. So even on very large systems, we see that the backups are running really fast because it doesn't have to pull a whole copy of that data across. It has a verification to know that the base that's already there is good, it's been verified, and then it'll bring over just the changed data. And on top of that, there's the option to do like a local speed vault, which is typically like a NAS device in the environment separate from the main infrastructure, but it actually will keep a replicated copy of that backup. And so for restores, it goes much faster because you're pulling it off of local storage, just based off of the hardware limitations and the speeds within the network. And we find that tends to help a lot, dealing with, and then the customers with really fast bandwidth and large infrastructure don't worry about that as much, but there's a lot of options that cover a whole spectrum of environments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. As far as scalability, since we're in the cloud, downloading everything can take a long time. Like Tim mentioned, the local speed vault's an option, but then again, you have local storage that it may not be usable after a ransomware attack because the attacker may attack that local storage. So we may be depending on just your cloud storage, which is fine. But if you don't
have
a
offline copy in a different data center too.
Exactly. So we have a DR as a service add-on, which is really, we have a data center which we are constantly restoring an offline copy of your server to, so that when an incident happens, we can just turn it on there. And then there's a couple things we can do. We can just establish a VPN for you to the data center. We can get you a copy of that server and restore your server on-prem from that, etc. But we have a couple resources then available. Another thing we've done is, and this has happened where a customer only had like a 300 meg download cable line, but their servers were terabytes, and they had to be up and running quickly. We restored them to Microsoft Azure. We restored them to the cloud, and got the customer up and running in the cloud, got them set up so they were able to work. And then we migrated them back to their data center once everything was cleaned up. So the cloud gave us our fastest recovery to get the customer up and running so they were able to do business. And then it gave us time then to do a gradual recovery back to on-site after their incident.
Exactly. And that last piece isn't time critical, because then you can plan around actual maintenance windows because the business is functioning. Then it's more of just an IT thing for scheduling it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody that participated. Feel free to send a message also if you have any questions. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody on the next one as we talk about security and monitoring and really awareness of how an attack is detected in your network. And from the network layer, from the server layer, from your workstations, from email, and how that awareness goes into a security operations center and actually becomes something that's actionable for you.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. It's great talking today.